this point, we all know that grad school can be, well, expensive. But today we're talking about the hidden cost of higher education that no one talks about. When I entered into graduate school, I had an imagination that it would be an institution that celebrated learning, education, and development. But when I arrived on campus, I learned pretty soon that that was not the case. And that's because of something called academic hazing. Now, for many of us, we may have heard of the word hazing, usually associated with Greek life, like fraternities and sororities. But what's upsetting is that it does not just find itself in these social clubs that we saw in our undergrad, but instead it is morphed into something unique and, I would argue, even possibly more dangerous as you enter into your graduate education. That's to say, hazing, which is normally being treated as a kind of way to force you through a rite of passage, usually through degradation, humiliation, and sometimes even violent means, so you can prove that you want to be there or be committed to the organization. And what was surprising is that existed in my PhD program. And as you can imagine, this was not happening in secret underground basements of fraternity houses, but instead in public spaces. This would be classrooms, private offices of chairs, faculty, and just in the general public, like in meetings or group gatherings. Academic hazing is a part of graduate school that oftentimes goes underaddressed because it's uncomfortable to acknowledge that the people that we were looking to for guidance, like our faculty, chairs, mentors, may have been treating us poorly, using emotionally or mentally abusive strategies to control us or to make us feel like we have to be a certain way. And there comes a lot of shame, guilt, and embarrassment from participating or being a victim of that treatment. Now, if you're interested in an entire video that's talking about what is academic hazing, what can it look like, and ways to handle it, please leave a comment down below because I can make an entire video about that. But today I just wanted to bring it to your attention that in addition to giant tuition costs, academic hazing is a thing that can be costly for your emotional, mental well-being. And that leads to the next hidden cost of higher education, which is internalized hyperproductivity. In general, being productive is not a negative thing. However, when you go into grad school, especially a PhD program, there's not a lot of structure, at least in the US, where you have the same type of expectations like you did in undergrad. In undergrad, you go to class, you make your grades, you turn in your assignments, and you're done. In your PhD, while it may look like that the first few years, there are other things going on that will dictate your success, like publishing, preparing for exams, language acquisition, and writing your dissertation, of course. But as these things are going on in the background, you are also feeling external pressure from faculty, your peers, or other people who are getting hiring or that you're just seeing kind of in the higher education news that are doing things that are so much better than you or so much more advanced or winning these fellowships and grants. And that can make you feel like you are not doing enough. So as a graduate student, it is really easy to internalize that you have to be producing all the time. And of course, this production can look different depending on what field you are, but feeling like you always have to be writing papers, being in the lab, applying for grants and scholarships, doing conference presentations, and the list goes on and on, can make it really hard for you to have this mental space, to have the capacity to relax, decompress, and see yourself not as a hyperproduction machine, but rather just a human. And by internalizing hyperproductivity, you also just generally start to feel like you're not enough. And that, coupled with academic hazing, leads to the next hidden cost of higher education. And it actually might shock you because it's a lower self-esteem. Now, I know you're probably thinking, wait, I'm in graduate school, probably doing some amazing research, learning amazing things. How can my self-esteem get lower? And that's because while you are simultaneously getting better and chasing your dreams, which is super positive, you're also, again, getting all this negative feedback and lack of support to actually realize your dreams and research. And so while you are feeling this desire to achieve and be amazing and do great, you're also realizing that it may not be as accessible as you have hoped, or even worse, you may get there and feel like you're just not gonna be able to do it. Now, a lot of people like to call this imposter syndrome, and I do have a video all about imposter syndrome that I will link at the end of this video so you can watch it next. But generally, I think it's a more expansive concept of not just feeling like you don't belong, but all of these systemic structures making you feel like you can't succeed. Versus something internal, I actually argue that it's something external that impacts your internal, and in return causes you to doubt yourself, and at the end of the day, lowers your self-esteem. And having to deal with the stress of academic hazing, internalized hyperproductivity, and a lower self-esteem can often lead to undirected anger. Now, this one's a little bit tricky because everybody doesn't experience it, but I would be remiss to not bring it up. Because I know when I graduated from my PhD, I had a lot of resentment and anger that I couldn't quite understand. And when it came down to it, it really was just the feeling of realizing now that this degree is over, all of those negative things that I've experienced didn't really have to happen. So I was angry with myself for not self-advocating, for choosing to be in this type of career path or educational pathway. But I was also angry with all the people that had saw me throughout this process and didn't try to help, didn't provide guidance, or were the actual perpetrators of academic hazing and being just, I guess, unkind to me. And even though I only experienced this undirected anger at the end of my degree, you could possibly experience it as soon as your first year. So it's an important thing to be aware of, because when you're starting to feel these emotions, it's important to, one, figure out where it's coming from or why you're feeling that, and then creating solutions to address the problems so it doesn't have to negatively impact your graduate experience. I just want to be honest. Higher education is not a walk in the park. It takes a lot of blood, sweat, and tears, and a lot of emotional labor to get through the process. And honestly, it's not for everybody. And I don't mean to say that like it's not for you, because it very much can be. But I do want to validate those people who are in this process, entering into this process, or even near the process, who are deciding that it's not worth it anymore. And if I would have known about these hidden costs of higher education, I definitely would have reapproached it in a completely different way to make sure that I was prepared, but also being extremely particular about what situations, circumstances, and mentors that I was putting myself in alignment with. Now, I don't say all of these negative things to deter you from applying to grad school or to convince you not to apply or to quit. The goal really is to, one, validate your experiences, and to also let those who are entering into grad school know what they are up against. Being prepared requires being aware, and that's why I have this channel. So if you're interested in knowing more ways to protect yourself or to deal with imposter syndrome, you should watch this video next. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you next week.